The call that night should have reassured me. Instead, it marked the beginning of a truth I could never unhear. A calm, steady voice introduced herself as Officer Rodriguez and told me they had my son, Quentin, at the station. He was safe. Safe. That word echoed in my head like a cruel joke, because my little boy was supposed to be in his bed under his dinosaur blanket, not found by strangers on the side of a highway. I barely remember grabbing my keys or driving through the dark streets. By the time I stormed through those station doors, my chest felt like it was caving in. And then I saw him, my 8-year-old, slumped in a plastic chair, his pajamas torn at the knee, his face stained with dirt and tears. He sprang into my arms, sobbing so violently it rattled through my bones. "I tried to find you, Mommy." I walked and walked, but the cars were too fast. When I asked what happened, he said words that turned my blood to ice. His father had locked him outside. At first, I tried to reason it away. A door jammed. A misunderstanding. But Quentin was clear. He wasn't mistaken. His father had shoved him out into the cold. And worse, Karen was there. My sister-in-law. In my house. In my bedroom. I wanted to collapse right then, but Officer Rodriguez's sharp gaze anchored me. She explained that Quentin had been wandering alone, 3 miles in the dark, dodging traffic, nearly struck by a truck. My child had survived pure negligence, no cruelty. And the reason? My husband and his own brother's wife couldn't keep their betrayal behind closed doors. As I held my son, neighbors' whispers began to ring louder in my mind. The perfume that lingered on the sheets. The excuses about late nights at work. Karen's constant presence, always finding some excuse to show up when I was gone. It all snapped into place like a cruel puzzle I had been too blind to solve. That night, Rodriguez told me a neighbor had surveillance footage. I insisted on seeing it. And when I did, the last sliver of denial inside me died. The video showed Dale and Karen sneaking into the house after I left for work. It showed them laughing, carrying wine, vanishing into the bedroom. Minutes later, Quentin being pushed outside, the door slamming shut. My son pounding his fists against the door, crying ignored. The rage that built inside me wasn't loud. It was quiet. Cold. I tucked it away as I cradled my son, promising him we'd never be at their mercy again. 3 weeks before that call, I thought my life was settled. Dale and I had history, college sweethearts, 12 years of marriage, a child we adored. We were the couple others envied, or so I believed. But somewhere along the way, he had grown restless, cruel even, while I had been too busy working night shifts and keeping our family afloat to notice. Now I saw clearly, this wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a choice. A choice to betray me, to endanger our child, to shatter everything we built. Revenge didn't come in the way movies show it, screaming confrontations, broken glass, or public scenes. Mine was patient, meticulous. First, I called my lawyer. I told her everything, showed her the footage, handed her the police reports. I made sure every detail was documented, the neglect, the affair, the danger to Quentin. Second, I stopped answering Dale's calls. Let him stew in silence, wondering what I knew, how much I'd seen. Karen too. When the divorce papers arrived, they came with a restraining order. Full custody of Quentin. Financial penalties that stripped Dale of comfort. And copies of the footage delivered anonymously to her husband, Dale's own brother. The day I moved my son into a small but warm apartment, I felt something I hadn't in years, control. Quentin finally slept peacefully, no longer afraid of being locked out, no longer hearing strange laughter through the bedroom walls. As for Dale and Karen, they tried to spin stories, to salvage their reputations. But small towns don't forget quickly, especially not when there's video proof. They became the whispers at the grocery store, the shameful punchline at barbecues. And me? I didn't need to shout, to destroy, to beg. I let the truth do the work for me. My revenge was simple. I took everything they thought I'd never have the courage to take, my freedom, my child, my dignity, while leaving them with nothing but each other, 2 liars trapped in their own mess. They locked my son out of the house. I locked them out of our lives forever. It didn't take long for the cracks in their little fantasy to show. Karen's husband, my brother-in-law Marcus, wasn't just furious when he saw the footage. He was humiliated. He'd always trusted his wife, always defended her. Now he had undeniable proof of her betrayal with his own brother. Within weeks, Marcus filed for divorce. And unlike me, he didn't do it quietly. He spread the word like wildfire. He showed the footage to his parents, to Dale's parents, to anyone who would listen. Soon, family dinners turned into battlegrounds, and no one could look at Dale without seeing the disgrace he'd brought on us all. I didn't have to lift a finger. Their reputations crumbled on their own. Dale lost his job when his boss heard about the neglect charges in the police report. No firm wanted to keep on a man who had let his 8-year-old wander down a highway in the middle of the night. Karen was forced to move out of Marcus's house with nothing but a suitcase and the shame of every whispering neighbor. The irony wasn't lost on me. Two people who thought they were clever enough to fool everyone ended up exposed for exactly what they were: selfish, careless, and weak. But still, it didn't feel complete. I wanted them to feel just a fraction of the fear my son felt that night, abandoned, helpless, locked out in the cold. So I waited for the perfect moment. It came when Dale begged to see Quentin, claiming he wanted to make things right. Legally, with a custody agreement, he had no ground. But I let him think I was softening. I agreed to meet him at the park. He showed up with Karen, both of them trying to act like they were in control again. I let them sit across from me, let them talk, let them beg. And then I pulled out my phone. I pressed play on the footage of Quentin pounding on that locked door. The audio filled the park bench between us, his sobs, his tiny fists banging, the sound of their laughter inside. People walking past turned their heads. A few stopped, watching, listening. Karen's face drained of color. Dale stammered something about a mistake. I stood, calm and deliberate, and said, "This is who you are. And everyone will know it. You'll never escape it." Then I walked away, leaving them in the silence of their own shame, surrounded by strangers' stares. That was the moment I felt the weight lift. Not because I hurt them, but because I no longer carried their secrets. The world saw them for what they were. Now, Quentin and I are building something new, just the two of us. Our home may be smaller, but it's safe. His laughter fills the rooms again. And every time I hear it, I'm reminded that revenge doesn't always need fire or fury. Sometimes, the sweetest justice is stripping the betrayers of the lies they hide behind, forcing them to live with nothing but their truth. And their truth? They locked out their own family for a fleeting affair. And in the end, I locked them out of everything that mattered. They tried to rebuild after the blow, but rebuilding requires weight, truth, money, trust, and they had none of it. Dale took temp jobs that paid barely enough to buy ramen and bus passes. Karen moved between couches and cheap motel rooms, apologizing to anyone who would listen while no one wanted to hear it. Their anger at being exposed turned inward and small, a bitterness that ate at them in slow, quiet ways. Word travels fast in small towns. A former friend stopped returning calls. The PTA moms who once smiled at me at school events now avoided eye contact with Karen. Marcus, shattered and vengeful in his own way, refused to let his ex-wife reclaim any semblance of normal life. He changed locks, cut ties, and when she tried to appear contrite, he met her with cold formality. The community's scorn was its own kind of punishment, less spectacular than a headline, but steady, unending. Meanwhile, my days settled into a new rhythm. Nights that had been work shifts at the hospital were still long, but when I came home now there was a small apartment waiting with a light on, a dinosaur blanket folded over a chair, and a boy who ran to me because he knew I would come. I watched Quentin relearn trust in slow increments. First a snack he didn't hoard, then a night when he slept straight through without whispering that someone had locked him out. We made rituals, Saturday pancake mornings, bedtime stories that turned into silly voices and giggles, a ritual of checking bolt and latch together before I turned off the light. Those rituals were my stitches, mending where betrayal had torn us apart. Justice, when it finally took shape on paper, felt practical and not theatrical. The court awarded me full custody, ordered counseling for Quentin, and mandated that Dale complete parenting classes. Legal victories rarely remove the sting of humiliation, but they create boundaries. They taught my son and me that there were systems that would protect us, that the law could be used as a shield against a private cruelty masquerading as a domestic quarrel. There were scars that wouldn't vanish. Family gatherings became battlegrounds for relatives who chose sides. Holidays felt awkward for a while, plates shuffled, old greeting card sentiment replaced by a thin silence. But the loudest change was not in them. It was in me. I found a fierceness I hadn't known I possessed, the ability to walk into a room, announce my son's presence, and let no one treat us as an afterthought. Where I once smoothed over discomfort to keep the peace, I learned to name what was unacceptable. Revenge, I discovered, had multiple layers. There was the immediate, public unmasking, the footage played on a park bench, the humiliation in strangers' faces. There was the legal recourse that severed ties and protected my child. And there was the quieter victory that came from rebuilding a life that no longer depended on their approval. Each of those was a small retribution, cumulative and steady, and together they were the answer to the fear I had felt that night. Years later, when I think of Dale and Karen, it's with a complicated mix of pity and contempt. I don't gloat, I don't need to. Their choices made their consequences inevitable. They were left with the knowledge of what they'd done, and that knowledge proved to be a harder fate than any gossip I could have spread. They carry that truth like a stone in their pockets, heavy, uncomfortable, immovable. There was one final moment that felt like a full stop on a loose sentence. Quentin turned 9, and we spent the day at the little lake just outside town. He raced across the grass, breathless and free, chasing a paper boat he'd made. I watched him fall, pick himself up, laugh. A woman sitting nearby, someone I'd never met, called out, "He looks like he's really happy." I thought of the night he walked miles alone and how small he seemed in that plastic chair, and then I watched him now, solid and sunburnt, running toward me without hesitation. When he stumbled and ran into my arms, his face flushed, I remembered the cold asphalt and the pounding on the door, and I felt something like triumph, not because I'd hurt them, but because I had given him back what they had taken: safety, steadiness, a home that answered when he knocked. The best revenge had not been to ruin them entirely, it had been to reclaim our life and make it better than what they'd betrayed. Life moved forward in ordinary increments: school projects, scraped knees, doctor's appointments, soft mornings on the couch. I learned to accept invitations again, to let neighbors into our little world, to let laughter sound bigger than it once had. There were still nights when fear crept in, old reflexes are stubborn, but they grew rarer, replaced by the confidence of a woman who had been pushed to the edge and stepped back into her own center. Sometimes, on difficult days, I allowed myself a small, private ritual. I would take the footage, saved on a secure drive for safekeeping, and pull it up, not to gloat, but to remind myself of the moment that changed everything. I watched the door slam, Quentin's small fists, the indifference in grown-up laughter, and then I closed the laptop. Each time I did that, the sight of it no longer produced cold fury. It produced something steadier, proof that I had acted, that I had not let that night become the story that defined us. We were the story now of survival, of quiet strength, of a little boy who learned to trust again. And the town learned something too. In the months and years after, whispers shifted into a different kind of conversation, about who we really are when no one watches, about what we owe our children, about accountability. It wasn't a tidy moral. People still made mistakes, and some people still chose secrecy. But the lesson was visible. Small cruelties can have vast consequences, and the people who hide behind them sometimes find there is nowhere left to hide. In the end, my revenge was not a single blow. It was a life rebuilt, truth exposed, and the deliberate, daily work of making sure my son never felt small again. The people who had walked into my bedroom and shut the door on my child were shut out of our home, of our family, of our future. They had been given everything they deserved by the simple fact that they had chosen themselves over us. I kept the dinosaur pajamas, mended the knee with a neat stitch, and put them in a drawer with other small relics of a life that had once been different. Sometimes Quentin would pull them out to wear on lazy Sundays, and I would smile, remembering how fragile he had been and how fiercely he had held on. We were not defined by one night of terror. We were defined by what came after. A steady love that did not flinch, a mother who learned to protect, and a child who learned to run towards safety instead of away from it. There are days now when I can forgive, though not forget. Forgiveness, when it comes, is for my own peace, not an absolution for those who hurt us. I don't wish them well in the sentimental sense. I wish them the hard clarity that would make them better if they cared to change. Mostly, I wish for my son's light to keep burning, bright and uncompromised. We live quietly, fiercely, and well. The past is a closed door that sometimes creaks in the wind. When it does, I feel the old fear. I remember the night, and then I look over at Quentin, sleeping soundly, and I know the truth. The monsters under his bed never stood a chance against us.